This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solinska. I'm your host. And today I am joined by Carmela Garcia Manas. Thank you very much once again, Carmela, for joining and sharing your research with us.
Thank you, Angelica, for having me.
So this episode is part of a series around Carmela's PhD research into education for sustainability, for social sustainability through socio-dramatic play. And in the first episode, Carmela discussed the context of her research at Ames. In the second, introduced the first theme that emerged from her research, which was around young children's perceptions of poverty and race. The following episode was around the theme of possession as a form of power. And in this episode, Carmela will be discussing her findings around social norms and subordination, and really looking at the impact and the power of the adult's role. So lots to address here. I believe, Carmela, that you're going to begin by talking about what we know as normativity and social norms and what this means to children, what they understand from this.
Yes, so just to give a little bit of an introduction to our listeners, to give also a bit of background in what we know about children and social norms. So we know that social norms govern our society, and it's one of the first things that the children need to acquire knowledge about, and just to make sure that they truly become integrated members of the culture. Now, young children's comprehension of others' intentions, and I'm including adults and peers, is intertwined with their understanding of normativity. So what we have done, or I have done throughout this program, is I've been looking into understanding the world around us and all the individuals within it, with the children. And this has also uncovered the social norms that govern our society in different topics that are covered by social sustainability. This means that social norms have intertwined with pressing social matters we have discussed in the previous episodes. And what my findings have highlighted is that children play different roles. And I'm going to divide it in three roles. One is children as followers of these social norms established by the adults, and so by other children. Children as enforcers of these social norms, and children as creators of new social norms in the peer culture. So we may begin perhaps with children as followers.
Yes, let's. So have you got some examples from your research then?
Indeed. Today I'm going to talk about different sessions, but I'm going to focus in session 3, which was week 3, where the children were instructed to select a piece of paper, and they could either find a pound symbol on this paper or a 0 symbol. If they had the pound symbol, they had to sit at a table that had lots of food in it, and water and drinks and so on, so the rich table per se. And if they got the 0 symbol, they had to sit on the poor table per se, that only had an empty bowl on it. This was the setup scenario. And so the children, what they did, they sat down in their respective tables. And well, the children at the rich table started eating their food and talking among each other. And the children, interestingly, the children in the poor table, they started also talking between each other, and they started playing with the empty bowl, spinning it around, like, can you do this? And I found this very interesting because I believe this could be interpreted as a distracting technique. They know that it's an unfair situation. They know that their friends are having different type of fruits and crackers and so on. And somehow they want to, distract themselves. Like, we are okay. We have an empty bowl and we can play with it. I think it was an incredibly creative, I must say.
Yeah, it does sound it.
So I was very surprised because this went on for almost 10 minutes and no children, not the ones from the rich table, not the ones sitting down on the pool table, decided to talk between each other, meaning between the tables. So, for example, the children sitting down at the pool table, they didn't ask the children sitting down at the rich table, "Hi, excuse me, can you share with me? Can you give me an apple?" And so the children sitting down at the rich table, by the rich table, they didn't say, "Hi, I can see you have nothing. Maybe I can give you a piece of apple or something." So thinking, while I was observing this, I kindly asked all the teachers that were with me, let's just move to the other room. We can still see the children, so the children are still supervised, but let's see if we can, if their actions or if the situation or the scenario changes. And funny enough, I would say 30 seconds after we say to the children, "Well, we're going to be next door. We'll come back soon." Just after 30 seconds, the children in the rich table stood up, and one child decided to bring an apple to the other table, to the pool table. But this was incredibly interesting because the child, it's not like the child stood up and maintained a conversation. The child ran to the pool table, left the apple, and quickly ran back to the rich table, as a form of, if the child was feeling somehow that he was doing something wrong.
As if he was not allowed to do that.
Yes, and this was very interesting because I didn't mention you cannot share. I just mentioned, look, if you got the pound symbol, you go to that table. If you go the tip symbol, you just go to the table and just enjoy role play and so on. So very interesting. And then followed by this action from one of the children in the rich table, the other children in the pool table started asking this child for food. "Can I also have a strawberry? Can I also have a cracker?" And then you can see in this, minute and a half, how the children from both tables, they start sharing with each other. All the children from the rich table go to the children at the pool table and start sharing crackers to that extent that after a minute and a half, the pool table was filled with food and drinks and crackers, and the rich table was completely empty. They had nothing left, literally. and this was very, very interesting, as you can see. And then, of course, one of the children complained, "But we have done it. We have given everything away. We have nothing left for ourselves." But it was very, very interesting. It was also interesting to observe how one of the children at the rich table approached one specific child at the pool table that perhaps didn't. Find quite challenging to talk, so with limited language. And the child at the rich table, aware of this, showing some awareness of this, approached this child and say, "I think you may want some as well. I think you want some as well," and gave him a strawberry. And I thought that this was very kind indeed, a very kind action, and a lot. But we will talk about that in the next episode, actually. So what does this show? This shows that the children were somehow influenced by the presence of the adult. And they conformed to the norm during the time the adults were present. Even if we were witnessing an unfair situation. This shows conformity, but this also demonstrates that this is one of the biggest issues that need to be discussed in early years, in early childhood education, in the settings, because normally we see the teacher as a guide and positive impact figure in early childhood educational settings. But this shows that the influence from the teacher's presence, merely presence, can also have a negative impact depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And
so, yeah, that is quite a big finding in terms of just how much power the adult has on the child. And we know that anyway, because children do listen to adults, and this is what they're taught to listen to adults, especially around like anything to do with safety and things like that. But in terms of, as you mentioned here, like an unfair situation, initially when you started saying, kind of painting this picture of this scenario, this case study, I kind of thought, oh, the children segregated themselves, they didn't talk to each other. But actually it was the adult who placed them in these different groups and set up the scenario. So the children already felt segregated from each other. They felt very different, and they felt like they couldn't even talk to each other. So that's really interesting that even without those, like the adult, there was nothing spoken around what you should and shouldn't do. And children, I guess, presumed that they shouldn't be talking to each other because they're in such different situations. And I guess it almost kind of paints that picture of like the rich and the poor not having anything in common, or not mingling, and not being able to do anything together, to communicate, to, we're just very different, so we stay apart, kind of thing.
Yeah, indeed. And if you look at our society and the adult world per se, you can also see this reflected somehow. So that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a very good point. And also coming back to the last episode,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about power dynamics, and there is little research about the influence, perhaps not the influence, but the negative influence that adults can somehow exert over children's actions and rights as well. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
rights. But there is an author that I particularly enjoy reading articles from. It's called Adami, that he himself highlights the extensive power dynamics involving not only children, but also the influence adults exert over children's rights, resulting in subordination. And this is a clear example of it. And it's especially difficult and complex in unjust situations, as you say. This was an unjust scenario from the very beginning. And that's what makes things more complicated somehow.
And the fact that the adult created that situation rather than the children creating it themselves, or it being, I guess, maybe if it's naturally kind of created, the children do still conform potentially to that situation, to those norms, I guess.
Yeah, we have seen, like I've seen in my findings, that there is obviously a more tendency to conform to these social norms created by the adults than by other peers. And this also shows the authority figure that we somehow reflect on children, no, from the very beginning. And again, it takes us back to the awareness, or developing awareness of the need for survival, the need for the adult for survival at the end of the day. And I think that also counts when looking at subordination. They're aware that the adult at the end of the day is the ones who are going to provide them something to eat at the end of the day, or also other needs. And so perhaps this also plays a role when conforming to adult social norms, even if these are unjust and fair.
So in terms of subordination, can we just define that term? What do we mean by subordination here? Because the way I understand it is giving something less importance.
So subordination, what I mean with subordination is when children conform or do things, or do not protest against different decisions, because of the fear of disapproval, and also the growing awareness of the power that the adult holds in all kind of environments, not only at home, but also at school, and so in other environments. And so this is what I mean with subordination, when they are in this perhaps unequal position if compared to the adult. And this obviously can be mitigated by giving children more agency and voice. But this is, at the end of the day, an inherent power that adults hold. And this will always be there, but there are certain ways to mitigate at least the negative impact that it can have. And the first thing to do is just to become aware of this power we hold as adults.
It makes me think of when you said about social norms being important in society and being a positive, actually, in terms of fitting in with society and being able to be active citizens in society. But at the same time, conforming to social norms can actually be quite dangerous, especially in that form of, in the context of social sustainability.
Indeed. And that's why it's very important to develop skills such as critical and creative thinking and to give them a voice as well. And that's why it's also very important to do research with young children rather than on them to better understand their perspectives and their understanding and the way they act and their starting point. We cannot define their starting point. They can only define it. They can only tell us. What we are is somehow interpreting their actions and behaviors and understanding, because of course, there are some certain limitations such as language and so on. But that doesn't mean that they are not capable. I mean, I have plenty of examples in my data of children being capable of understanding very complex issues and not only of understanding, but also capable of contributing with different type of solutions. And
this from... I was just going to say, this reminds me of the fact that you mentioned at the beginning that children are followers and forces, but also creators of social norms. So they can also shape new norms as well.
Indeed, and so they are independent thinkers and action takers, and they enjoy as well creating their norms. It gives them agency, but again, they tend to create norms when they are within the peer culture and not as much with adults, because they are aware of what
those power dynamics.
Power dynamics, exactly. So I have some examples as children as creators. And this mostly happens in the sessions that are not led by adults, so no instructor. For example, we have session 3, which is the one we talk about, the snack. And then the day after, the children, I had the same setup, but I didn't start the session. I just let the children enter the classroom and choose the paper. And you can see that some children, because they knew what will happen, they will open in the paper, trying to role play this scenario. They were opening the paper, they will find out it's a 0, they will put it back, fold it again, put it back, and choose a different one. So there were only 4 0 papers left for those children that perhaps arrived later. But then what you can see is the children sharing from the beginning. It's true that some of them role play based on the social norms that were established by the adult the day before. So some children were saying, no, you cannot because you're on the table. But yes, but you can share. The teacher is not here. And then we again see that the influence of the teacher is there. But at the end of the day, they start creating their own norms. Yes, because we can. And maybe we can give 2 strawberries to him and then 3. And they start counting and developing this mathematical language, which is a different topic. But we can see that they start sharing and talking between each other from the very beginning of the session, discussing and creating their own norms or modifying the norms that were established by the adult towards a more fair resolution, which is also very interesting. The children didn't only somehow protest against this social norm by sharing with others, but they also modified it towards a more fair or a fairer outcome. So that shows you as well that children look for that fairness. They need that fairness. They need that respect.
But I was going to say, it's interesting that even though they knew that wasn't fair, because they tried to create their own norms, they tried to share, they still didn't say anything to the adults or when the adults were present. So, when the adult left, it shows that they have an awareness that this is not right, this isn't fair, this isn't what we want to do. But they, like you said, they only acted when the adults were not there. So they always knew, we don't like this situation, or we don't agree with it and we want to do something different. But they just didn't act in it with the adults' presence. And that's so interesting.
And they didn't speak out either. And interestingly, I have to share this as well, because of course we came back to the room when we saw that the children were sharing, and I was like, oh, I can see that you share. So why, may I ask, why didn't you share after a discussion? I asked them, why perhaps it took you so long, or why did you share later? They want to say when we were not there, because I didn't want to influence the answer. But why did you decide to only share at the end? And then one of the children said, because we didn't want you to see it. So obviously one can interpret it in the most subjective way, because at the end of the day, we are humans, right? And as I said, it's all based on interpretation, but this also gives you evidence that the children really wanted to share. That was the first reaction to that unfair scenario, but they didn't, because the teachers were present and they thought that what was expected from them was to remain at the tables.
Hiya! Just quickly, I wanted to ask a favour from all of the listeners and viewers. It would really help this podcast if you subscribe on the platform you are listening or watching on. This will help the Voice of Early Childhood podcast to continue putting out thought-provoking and reflective episodes with a range of guests. And if you are enjoying listening to this podcast, please do share it with someone else who you think would love it too. And of course, as always, we encourage you to share your voice too. If you have reflections, thoughts, and comments, please do share this episode on social media with your comments and tag the Voice of Early Childhood. Let's keep these thought-provoking discussions going. Thank you. I'll let you get back to the episode now. Yeah, that is so interesting. And it makes me think of what you were saying earlier, the importance of ensuring that we give children agency and voice and really foster that critical thinking. And how do we support children in that? Because here we've got a scenario where they didn't question. They thought that they couldn't question. How do we really encourage children to question things and be curious, even if they think the adult has the power here? We don't want to go against what the adult says. Naturally, we do as the adult says. That's just how things are. That's the norms. What about, encouraging children to question things? And I guess the point is we have to encourage children to question everything. And although that may sometimes be difficult for us as adults, when we say to them about maybe like hold, especially with, at home, hold my hand when we're crossing the road, and the child says why, or is reluctant to, obviously that will cause issues. But it's just fostering that curiosity all the time, isn't it? Because then you can have conversations around it, because for these reasons, you give them a reason around safety or whatever it might be. But yeah, it really encourages them to question absolutely everything.
Yeah, I think this is very important to also provide different timings during the day to discuss as a group different subjects. I think is also very important, because the children then will be given a voice, and not only that, but will be listened to, and they will be able to share opinions. I think this is very important. But I want to highlight as well that it's not about setting up social drama sessions about social sustainability or activities. As I mentioned in the last episode, it's about making sure that children's voices are heard all through the day, all through the week, all through the year, because that will give them the power to speak out when they believe that it's not right. And they know what is right and what is not. It's just sometimes, they are influenced for different variables, and it depends on the context as well. But we need to make sure that as educators, we listen actively to children and we question ourselves everything as well. I think that's very important. We need to question ourselves every little thing. Like, let's say that a child has done something, for example, say that a child has taken someone else's snack from the table. So rather than just saying, no, please give it back, and so on, just take 2 minutes to look at the child's eyes and ask, so tell me, why did you do this? And if the child is not able yet to answer to why questions, because I know this also comes in different stages of development and so on. Perhaps just give them clues. It's because you really like it. It's because you don't have any. Perhaps these. So tell me, what do you need? Why did this happen? And give them a voice. Listen to them at every single point in time, and so they can express themselves. I think this is very important as well. Sometimes we focus too much in communication and language, and I truly believe it's incredibly important to help children to develop their communication and language. But this goes nowhere if we do not listen to them actively. And this doesn't require a specific activity. This is an everyday, every single second of the day thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And listening to children's behavior and their facial expressions and, those non-verbal cues, like you mentioned, if they don't have that language to be able to communicate themselves in detail or clearly yet. So in supporting children to be curious and ask questions, we need to, as adults, be curious and ask children questions, therefore. So it's both ways, isn't it? Rather than coming from a place of judgment and saying, no, don't do that, you're being greedy or you're being naughty and things like that. Ask why and be curious, or at least consider why and try to understand the situation and then ask the child, rather than jumping to a conclusion instantly.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, children are mature in their very own ways, and they have the ability to critically somehow evaluate and counter social norms, right? That they, especially if they perceive these as unjust or discriminatory or so on. They not just imitate and expect certain behaviors. They also protest against, unjust scenarios. We just, as you say, we have to give them a voice. We have to have a voice ourselves, and we have to question ourselves constantly, every single little thing, and perhaps reflect. This is something that I also miss, and I have seen in 12 years working in early year settings, that we perhaps allocate plenty of time, a little bit of time to planning and then to the activity itself. But we don't grant ourselves or allow ourselves to perhaps allocate certain time to reflection. And I think reflection is incredibly important, especially as a teacher. And this will certainly help because sometimes, as you say, some children may have limited language and we may not be able to understand first sight. But perhaps if we reflect, if we only give ourselves that time to reflect, we could somehow could develop our questioning and so understanding of the children's perspectives and points of view.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I always say that knowledge is kind of nothing without reflection, really. You have to play around with that information, with that knowledge in order to make it something. You have to reflect on it in order to be able to come up with understandings. And you're so right, we do need to make a lot more time for that as educators, especially as adults. And reflecting with children, like you were saying, throughout your research, at every point there is a reflective discussion, isn't there, where you talk to children about what has happened. So in terms of this scenario then, what came about from the reflective activity with the children, from the reflective discussions here? I know you mentioned earlier, and the fact that you asked the children why. I can see you've shared, and try to kind of gain that understanding. Is there anything else that came out of that?
So in that specific week, we talk about the importance of speaking out in front of unjust scenarios, which by the way, it wasn't my intention. It wasn't, it just, especially in early childhood education, nothing goes as planned, let's say, so you have to adapt. So we talk about the importance. Then another child, after this child say, because we didn't want you to see, another child says, yes, we didn't want you to know. Mm-hmm. And so we had to talk about how important it is to talk in unjust scenarios. If you believe that something is not fair, please say it, because it's by sharing it how we can change things. And then, of course, the following weeks we focus on perhaps listen more actively and attentively and encouraging children to speak out. So tell me, what do you feel now? And talking about feelings and emotions. What we saw was a big change by the end of the program. For example, in the very last session where the children had to role play all different scenarios from the program, we see that a child in the snack area where these two tables are set up creates a norm, again, creating norms, and says only boys can cat. And the 4 children, there were 2 boys and 2 girls sitting down by this table. And the child who said this, created this new norm, was holding a knife. There was another knife on the table. So there were 2 knives. I said, I can just only give it to boys because only boys can cut. And interestingly, this is creating a norm. And and interestingly, one of the boys that was sitting down by the table say, here, kind of ignore what this boy said and share his knife with the girl in front of him. And then the boy who created the norm said, but I say that only boys can cut. I say, no, they can cut too. And then they share the knife. But this is great because somehow we can see that they are speaking out. Perhaps they are not giving a whole explanation about how unfair it is for only boys to be able to cut or use the knives and so on, and how discriminatory this is. But at the end of the day, what they are doing is they are speaking out and they are taking action against a norm that is very unjust, I must say. Yeah. And we can see these all through the session as well. Through that session, for example, there were in another instance, there was 2 children in 2 houses. I'm not sure if I talk about this, but this session was about housing and the problem of housing. I'm talking about different models of housing, people that have no house, people that have small house and share with lots of people, renting, buying, and the difference. And we had 2 houses. One of them was made by the children. It was huge, beautifully decorated, under their point of view, of course, with stickers and all kind of materials and shiny and, perfect. And the other one was just a very small kind of shoebox and almost broken. And so one house cost £1 to rent, and the other one was £2. And so in this session, the 10th session, the last of the program, 2 children entered the beautiful £2 house, the greatly decorated house. The £1 house was forgotten in the corner of the classroom. And then another child, a 3rd child, came by and say, hi, can I enter this house? I have £2. And then one of the children that was inside the house said, no, this house is not £2 anymore. It's now £5.
Oh, interesting. I wonder why that was.
I wonder where that comes from. And then the child say, okay, here you are. And then the child inside the house say, no, that's not £5. That's £2. And then interestingly, the best friend of this child who was asking to join them, because at the end of the day, perhaps the child is not interested about the house itself. It's about joining their play. Yeah, She follows Borsaro's notion of peer culture and so on. But his best friend, who was in the house, said, yes, you need £5. So of course, we will talk about this in exclusion and inclusion, which is the last episode. Long story short, the child who is waiting to enter the house holding £2 says to the other child, okay, can you swap money with me? Can you give me your £5 so I can enter the house? And you can, which is incredibly clever if you think of it. And then the child who's in the house, sorry, I cannot, because otherwise I won't have a house. But I can tell you who gave it to me, and pointed at the cashier who was in the other classroom. So this child went to the cashier, asked for money, but there was no money left in the cash machine. So interestingly, the child says, I have no money, but I can give you an idea. And this is the most interesting thing. And the child, we will talk about this in the next episode. And the child then the child asks, what idea? I have £2 and I need 5. Like, you have no money. Say, well, maybe you can draw money. And gave him a paper and a pen, and the child drew the number 5. The child came back with this paper with that number 5 that you may not even be able to identify. and no one called and went to the house and said, here you are, I got £5. And then the child joined the other 2 children's play and entered the house.
That is fantastic. It's just such a great example of children taking things from their experiences, understanding of society, even things like, house prices going up and inflation and things like that. But also what we mentioned, I think the other day, around prices going up. Well, I don't know if we mentioned prices in particular, but depending on value and demand. So that's quite an interesting link. Again, everyone wants to be in this house, or you want to be part of it. So now it's more, it costs more to be part of it, because it's not just an empty house. You are paying for that belonging element and aspect, aren't you? But also how resourceful of the children to essentially make money, as we do as adults anyway. Obviously they created it by writing money, but it is essentially going out and making money in some way, being resourceful, going finding someone that can help you. It's so fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating, and it shows as well that ability to adapt the behavior as well in response to different social cues and roles. And I must say, this play was quite sophisticated for children that were 3 years old at the time. So
3 years old.
3 years old, 3 to 4. So 3.5, 3 and 7, depending on the child. But this is quite sophisticated as well, and it shows you as well that children are capable of creating norms, and they enjoy it and they need it, and the same with modifying. But we need to give them a voice and the chance to develop this during play, and that's why play is also very important, and free play.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably a good point to wrap everything up on, and maybe pose the listeners and viewers with the reflection, as we talked about reflection being so important, of what you write in your article. Actually, how can we foster a more critical and inclusive understanding of the world for children that prompts their exploration and questioning of societal structures? So really considering that, how can we do that in our own settings, in our own communities, with the children that we have, with the cohorts that we have. So if listeners and viewers, if you haven't already listened to the previous episodes in this series, you can find them on the Voice of Early Childhood website. The link is in this episode description. And here you'll also be able to find Carmela's articles. And of course, you can also search for the Voice of Early Childhood podcast on streaming platforms and YouTube. So our next episode, I believe is the 4th theme, Remove Findings. So that's all about the essential skills for social sustainability.
Yes, or essential tools that
essential tools
during the program when facing unjust scenarios, and we will talk about a bit of what we talk at the very end of this episode: the critical thinking skills, creativity, empathy, and negotiation as well.
Well, thank you very much, Carmela, for sharing your research once again, and thank you to all of the listeners. And we will speak again next week, Carmela.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you to you all for listening.